Late last night, a spokesperson for Michigan released this statement, quote, "We remain steadfast in our conviction that due process matters. Like all members of the Big Ten Conference, we are entitled to a fair, deliberate, and thoughtful process to determine the full set of facts before judgment is made. We continue to fully cooperate with the NCAA and the Big Ten regarding this matter." So everyone here will be in on this story because it has such far-reaching implications. And Paul will come to you, but Heather, will start with you. For those who don't know Heather's work, no one is more connected on this story than she is. And so Heather, I'll start with you. Bring everyone up to the minute on everything we need to know as we await the word from the conference commissioner.
Well, Greeny, the conference commissioner is not at the college football playoff meetings in Dallas where all of his commissioner peers are because he has some other things to attend to. And what's going on right now is Michigan's letter, the 10-page letter that it sent back urging due process. One source told ESPN that Michigan is not bringing a knife to a gunfight on this. So there's also Michigan state legislatures, lawmakers who have also told Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti to urge him to follow due process. Now, there are two separate things going on here. The NCAA is doing its own investigation. My understanding is that the Big Ten has not initiated its own investigation. It's relying on information it has gathered from the NCAA in part and following other reports that have come out. But the sense is that the Big Ten has enough information to prove that Michigan broke its sportsmanship policy by illegally stealing signs. My sources are telling me that no evidence has come through yet that shows Jim Harbaugh knew about this or orchestrated it, but the Big Ten will point to the NCAA rule that says even if a head coach doesn't know about it, he is responsible for the actions of his staff. Michigan is expected to really push back on this, and they are working with a pricey law firm in D.C. to have some legal action if needed.
Yeah, so many things in that I feel are important. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. Let's start with that. So whether Harbaugh knew or he didn't know, the judgment is it's his job to know, and he's responsible for it anyway. Now, those who will say that they're pushing back, what are they? I'm going to use the term veiled threats because as I read it, that's the way I read what the Michigan letter sounded like to me. How would you explain what it is that the Michigan letter suggested to the Big Ten commissioner that they may be willing to do in the event that due process is not shown here?
Well, Greeny, I can't say if they threaten legal action in that letter or not, but there's certainly language in the Big Ten's sportsmanship policy that is up for debate, and that's a sportsmanship policy that has not been rewritten since 2013. It's pretty vague. So if there was a way to push back on it, I'm sure that they could poke some holes in a document that hasn't been changed for that long. But also just the question of whether or not Harbaugh is responsible for this, I think that's something that they could push back on too.
The other piece of it, and again, what I meant by that, when I read their letter, it sounded to me like they were saying, if you come down on us here, we know things about other schools as well. This may be far more prevalent than the world thinks it is, and we're ready to bring that to light. We're ready to bring a lot of dirty laundry to this party if you aren't careful with your action. That's me paraphrasing, to be clear, but that is the way I read that.
Yes, no, you're right. And that's why Michigan brought up earlier the fact that they allege that Ohio State and Rutgers colluded against Michigan in last year's Big Ten championship by Ohio State giving Purdue the offensive signals for Michigan and Rutgers giving them the defensive signals. That was part of an early step forward in that strategy.
For what it's worth, Michigan blew out Purdue in that game anyway. So we don't know just how valuable this stuff is or isn't, but that isn't what's at stake here anyway. All right, let's clear the decks for this. And Sir Paul, we will start with you. There is no one whose voice I think resonates more loudly in the world of college football. As we await this word from the Big Ten today, what are you thinking right now?
Well, I'm thinking that Tony Petitti, the commissioner, and he's only been on the job a short period of time, is in one of the most unique and perilous positions I've ever seen a college administrator in. He literally is trying to avoid a civil war within his own league. And he's not also going to be bullied, Greeny. It's one thing to threaten lawsuits, but when you get involved with 10 or 11 state legislatures, I don't think Tony Petitti gives two rips about some hack legislature in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's going to make a decision based on what he thinks is in the best interest. And I think if he caves in, he sets a precedent. Go ahead and do whatever you want. I'm not going to do anything, and we all know the NCAA is not. So I still believe he's going to make a statement, and I think that statement is coming soon. And I think most people believe that he is going to look at Michigan and say, you should have known, even if the evidence doesn't directly link Jim Harbaugh. Therefore, we are going to act. Therefore, a suspension of 1 game, 2 games, or whatever.
I would just ask you, though, then, Paul, is there some concern for you that this would be creating a precedent where, for lack of a better way of putting it, an angry mob can create this kind of situation at any time in any conference with any program?
It is a concern, Greeny, but on the other hand, let's not get due process all hung up on what the commissioner is doing. He simply if he suspends Harbaugh, he's simply saying, I am keeping you out of the game as this continues. He's not sanctioning him for life. He's not taking Michigan out of a championship run. And I think you have to look at that distinction here. People hear things on TV up and down the dial and think the same rules apply to one place that apply to another. This is a man who has to go by his policy, but he also has to show leadership and run this league, and he can't be concerned that Michigan is responding, hey, well, we may have done it, but so did they. I mean, I think we got over that in grade school, didn't we?
What's the number one thing in your mind right now?
Obviously, something happened. It was Michigan the only one. That's the biggest kind of thought over all of this is there was something that went down when it came to rule breaking, unwritten rule breaking. Was Michigan the only school? Because if Michigan's the only school, then this is a completely different conversation. And to Michigan's point, or at least in their letter, they're implying that they're not. Paul Feinbaum said something interesting when he said, make the best decision of the best in the best interest.
Right.
Best interest of who and or what? That's for Rob Petitti. The decision of the best interest is it going to be in your conscience? Like, hey, you did something that wasn't right, or the best interest of Michigan, the best interest of the conference? Like, that's going to be the most kind of pinpoint moment for me is if a decision gets made, is that decision made because, you know what, we will give a 1-game suspension to Jim Harbaugh. Wow, that's really going to hinder the program.
Right.
And slap it on the wrist. Or, because then that's the best interest of the program and the best interest of the conference, if we're being candid. Or is it going to say, no, you made a mistake, you broke rules, and the decision is going to be a heavy fine and a suspension, a takeaway of scholarship and a suspension? Because then that's the best interest of setting a precedent of rule breaking.
Right. But it obviously would be coming down very hard on what is one of the 2 flagship programs of the Big Ten.
That's not the best interest of the conference then.
It may not be. And so that's Tony Petitti is weighing all these different things. You said something in our meeting this morning that really struck me, Harry, which is you were talking about how, particularly when you were in the NFL, this kind of thing is commonplace. Now, the difference here, and I hear you lying, I'll come to you in a minute on what you told us, but the difference here, of course, is that the use of videotaping the equipment is what makes this over the line. Stealing signals is commonplace. But how important is this? Let's just say we're living in a world where Michigan has stolen these signals. How much of an advantage, how much of a competitive advantage is that for a football team?
It's a small advantage, and Dio, you know this, right? The teams that I played on, we was in no huddle offense, started games out in it, right? And that was our MO. That's one of the things that we did very, very well. Well, some of the coaches that I had, our mindset was, okay, we're going to change some of our signals. I have double signals, but at the same time, the team that we're playing against, they have to stop it. You have a blink of an eye, and when you have an opportunity to stop what the opposing team is doing. And if you're not correct, then you're not just correct. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in, oh, my God, this team is stealing signs. People forget how short of a time period you have to make a decision to stop a play. That's a blink of an eye.
Take me through what you were telling us. Your job was when you were the backup quarterback in Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, I would know the signals of defensive coordinators. We would know what their hand signals were because we would play no-huddle football, and I would stand on the sideline often, and I would see the defensive coordinator signal into the defense, and I would go, hey, they're going to be in cover 2, and there comes pressure. And
Go through this more slowly. Give me an idea of what that would look like. What is the defense?
I mean, it's almost like a baseball hand signal. Yep. There could be a touch of the hat or a wipe of the chest or, any type of, it's some type of nonverbal signal, and I would know their signals, and I would sit there and go, oh, okay, it's going to be this type of defense, and I would tell our play caller, and then our play caller, we would run no-huddle football, and then here was the counter to it, Greeny. Then defenses realized, okay, like they know what we have, and then they would give us dummy signals, just like in baseball. So then I'd go, hey, coach, it's going to be cover 3, and they're going to blitz, and all of a sudden I'd be like, well, it wasn't cover 3, and then all of a sudden that plan is away. So, that's one of my points here, and I tweeted this out the other day, if you as a coach know that the other team knows your signals, then huddle up or change it. Peyton Manning was the king of this. Peyton and TJ Watt has talked about this. Listening to the broadcast, they would hear the cadence or the verbal stuff from quarterbacks at the line of scrimmage, and they would study it. So Peyton would then lie to the defense by using those same things and then change the play call.
But I want to make it clear some might listen to what you're saying and push back by saying, so they're cheating, so I'm going to adjust what I'm doing because I know they're cheating. Wasn't the easier answer to be teams should not be cheating? I'm trying to get a handle here.
It's not cheating if you are outwardly sharing information to your team. It's then my kind of responsibility to do whatever I can to win.
I understand that. Once again, that was how I viewed this when we began, and yet there were very specific rules in place, whether we all think they make sense or not, about whether you can videotape them and then maintain them over the course of time rather than stealing them as a game is going on. I get it.
All this
it's
could
a
be
distinction without it. How could it be prevented?
If you just put the radios in the helmet.
Yes. Okay, yeah, they
or
don't
if you
have
just
them.
huddle.
If you just
huddle, and all these part of the culture of college football is let's run 100 snaps a game. Yep. And the last thing I'd say about the competitive advantage, because I know we want to get Kimberly in here, I want to be respectful to that. So you mean to tell me it's cool that some of these schools can call other schools and or their players and say, we will give you X amount of dollars to come to our school and leave that school, and we have more money. So that's not a competitive advantage, but me knowing if you're going to blitz is?
I hear you. All I'm saying is I didn't make up the rules. These are the rules, and if they're breaking them, that's a whole separate conversation. I actually am on your side. Logically, I hear what you're saying. Kmart, jump in here.
So within this conversation, I'm fascinated from the NFL standpoint of what happens to Harbaugh's future. Does Harbaugh, depending on how this all shakes out, does he view the NFL as a safe harbor? Does the NFL look at Harbaugh and think, you know what, there are a lot of teams that are going to need head coaches in this upcoming offseason? Are teams going to look at Harbaugh and say, you know what, depending on how this shakes out, we might go after him? This is a guy who hasn't coached in the NFL since, I think, 2014 when they went to the Super Bowl. I just wonder, when you're another team looking at Jim Harbaugh, do you think this guy just wants somewhere to go? If college football is no longer safe for him, and is that what you would want for your organization in the NFL?
If Michigan wins the national championship this year, would that title be tainted? Now, before I let you answer, let me put some numbers up on the screen, okay?
I'm going to destroy this, Greeny.
Fair enough. I'm just putting the numbers on the screen. I will let you destroy whatever you would like. Jim Harbaugh, and Paul pointed this out, Jim Harbaugh, after the pandemic-shortened season, was a man in serious jeopardy of losing his job. And you see the numbers there. He was 49-22. That's a good record. It's certainly not great. He had never beaten Ohio State. He had never made the playoff. Since that time, he has lost 3 games in 3 seasons. Made the playoff both years. Won the Big Ten championship both years. Beaten Ohio State handily both times. And you look at the margin of victory they have per game. They have become a dominant football program. Some will look at that, Paul Feinbaum, and say, that seems a little too coincidental not to be suspicious. What do you think?
I don't think it's coincidental. I think it's exactly what you see. When this started, he started winning again. And back to the question you asked me, Greeny, do I think it will be tainted? Yes, I do, in the strongest possible language. I frankly would put an asterisk by Michigan if they win the national championship. I think it will be that bogus based on what I believe. I'm not saying I know what I believe.
Okay, fair enough. There's one strong opinion. Danny, go.
In the last 3 years, Michigan has had 11 day one and day two NFL draft picks. The only teams to have more are Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State. So you can sit here and say, well, there's been an improvement when it comes to wins and losses because potentially this, or maybe they just got really good talent-wise. Maybe that's part of the reason why, is because the talent has, recruitment-wise, drastically improved. And they had Aiden Hutchinson and Dax Hill and DJ Turner and Mozzie Smith as defensive draft picks that were first rounders. So it's not tainted for me. I think this, like, honestly, the more I think about this, this feels like a giant witch hunt. It really does.
I think there are a lot. Look, so you're seeing the dichotomy of it.
Whatever side you sit on, you will find reasons to say this is a witch hunt, or you will say no. Look at those stats. They are much better as a team, more dominant since they started these infractions.
Well, you look at the 2023 team right now. They have 9 guys on their team that's going to play on NFL teams next year.
Beating the doors off teams.
You told me this morning, tell everyone what you told me in the meeting this morning. You have been in the building for 2 of their games this year. Tell me what you told everybody.
Listen, I will tell you this. Michigan, in my opinion, is the most complete team in college football. In Georgia,
Yeah.
Michigan is the most complete, dominant football team. I've seen Ohio State in person twice. I've seen Penn State. Clearly, Michigan, in my opinion, is better than both of those football teams. And I look at the first 9 games of the year, right? They have outscored their opponents 366-60. You're going to tell me that a sign-stealing scandal allowed that to happen, that they wouldn't be able to beat East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, Rutgers, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan State, and Purdue?
Yeah.
No, but that's the point. But their strength of schedule is like 100 and something in the country.
Greeny, you know what's
they're going to get Penn State.
So why would we put an asterisk beside them if they win a national championship?
Well,
That's
because
my
now
point.
they got to beat Penn State and Ohio State and maybe Georgia and somebody else, and that would become the question. Let me give Heather. I would love to do this for 3 hours, but we're going to run out of time. Heather, jump in here.
1 point to answer your question on that, Greeny. There was one school that I was not able to confirm Connor Stallions was at to scout, and that was TCU.